when I opened the book, I was like, wow, that's a harsh title. Like, God is not fair. And then I got about halfway through, and the point you're making goes back to what we're talking about, is that God is not fair because of the grace and love, the dynamism of these things that are always meeting us where we are. Can you go a little bit deeper into that for me? I think it's a good segue here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for that. I love that. I love that title, and it comes from one of the essays in the book. And as you say, where it arises is actually a reading of a parable in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's one that as I start to talk about it, many of our listeners will recognize it right away, which is basically this landowner sends out a manager to hire people throughout the day to come work on this vineyard, hires a group of folks at 9 o'clock in the morning, another group at noon, another group at 3, another group at 6, kind of thing, right? And the day is over, and they start paying the day laborers in kind of reverse order. So the last to come get paid first, and they get a whole day's wage. And then, in the meantime, the rest of the people are looking on, and these people who've been working since 9 o'clock are like, "This is awesome, man! If they've worked 3 hours or 2 hours and they're getting a full day's wage, we're going to get overtime, right? This is great." But everybody gets paid the same, and the people who had been working all day or had been working the majority of the day are enraged, right? They're furious about this. And, I have to be honest. I don't know about you, Stephen, and I'm sure our listeners, many of you might be in the same boat as me. I can't help when I hear that, but my initial gut instinct is to get like upset, to kind of like
Sure.
be
Yep.
frustrated by that, as Jesus's hearers were, right? And he says in the end, he uses his voice through that of this manager, of this land manager, says, "Are you envious because I'm generous?" And I think that is a line worth taking to prayer and reflection. Like, we don't have any right to claim anything beyond, what the agreement was. That was what Jesus's parable was all about, right? Those guys who worked at 9 o'clock in the morning, they knew what they signed up for. And the people who worked up later, they took their chances, but they knew, they were gonna figure it out. And if the person, pays equally, and it doesn't fall beneath like the minimum expectation, or contrast the agreement that they had, then what is the problem here, except for envy, except for jealousy, except for a sense of self-righteousness? And, you know, the truth is, according to our worldly standards, Jesus was not being fair there, right? The manager wasn't being fair. God was really unfair. And you could almost hear the stomping of the feet in like a preschool like temper tantrum from those people working all day. That's not fair. Well, that's actually a good thing, though, right? And that's the invitation here. I'm not saying this in any of my writing or any of the preaching I've done over the years, or any of the public lectures and workshops I lead. I'm not coming from a position of absolute knowledge, of certitude, of like having figured it out. Because even though I know where this story is going, every time I still get that little like punch in the gut, that like, oh man, if I was one of those 9 o'clock guys, and in some contexts we are all kind of that way, right? Maybe it's not about finances and work. Maybe it's about caring for a loved one, right? I watched a really great movie on an airplane recently called His Three Daughters. I don't know if you've heard about this. I think it's on, I don't know what network or what service it's on, but basically it could have been a stage play. It's very, very, very simple, about an hour and 40 minutes long. And it's about three adult women who are sisters, and they've all come together because their father is in the last stages of life in hospice care. And they're in this apartment kind of with each other, and they're working through their experiences and judgments and views, and the pain that they've carried and the prejudices they have of one another and so forth. And one of the things that comes up is this kind of grappling with one of the sisters had been caring for their father for a long time, lived with him in this apartment. The other two had been living their lives in different ways and negotiating these things. I mean, I mentioned that only because I thought it was a really great reflection of what I think a lot of families go through. And how do we evaluate, quote, what is fair? I think it's oftentimes, if we're honest, really an excuse. It's a placeholder for I don't get what I want. And at the end of the day, that's not Christian, right? That's not agapic love. That's really a kind of self-centered interest. And that's something I think that's really hard for us to work through at any stage of life. And so that's where the subtitle comes in, for this collection of reflections, which is God is not fair and other reasons for gratitude. I mean, we should be grateful that God is not fair because more often than not, we're the ones who are in need of a lot of generosity and a lot of leeway and a lot of forgiveness from God. But how quick we are to assume that we're not getting what is ours or what we're owed.